I need to explain what I'm up to in this video and the two that will follow. In this three-part series within a series, I'll be exploring Beethoven's 13th String Quartet in B-flat major, Opus 130, written in 1825. In the present video, I'll deal only with the original final movement of that quartet, a great multi-part fugue almost 15 minutes long in this recording, which is so hellishly difficult both to play and to hear, and which so overwhelms the rest of the composition that Beethoven's publisher convinced him to write a substitute finale more likely to attract customers, with the understanding that the great fugue would be brought out separately. Remarkably enough, the headstrong Beethoven saw the wisdom of this plan and agreed to it. The Große Fuge was thus brought out in print 2 years later, the year of the composer's death, and the substitute finale proved to be the last thing he ever wrote. So here's my plan. In this video, I'll present only the Große Fuge, Opus 133, and the two follow-up videos will deal with the entire quartet. First with the Große Fuge as final movement, then with the replacement finale. I will not duplicate most of my comments over the Große Fuge in my follow-up video in hopes of keeping it to reasonable length, and what I have to contribute to an understanding of it will remain available in this video for anyone who wishes to refer back to it. I really think that Opus 130 ought to be listened to in two different ways, with the Große Fuge as finale and with the substitute finale. They really are two different experiences, both of them to be savored for different reasons. The audience for the Große Fuge as a freestanding composition has always been rather small, because the demands Beethoven places on both listeners and players are quite a bit heavier than most music lovers are willing to shoulder. This music is not in any sense a light diversion. If you're hearing this piece for the first time, or have heard it but were put off by it, I'd like you to give me a chance to say a few things about it that might make the experience more enjoyable and might even change your mind. The Große Fuge is as difficult to talk about as it is to listen to. Various commentators have proposed a number of ways of understanding it, and I lean toward that interpretation that sees the fugue as modeled on the four-movement symphonic pattern with its movements connected. Even then, my reading of it is quite different from anything I found in print, and I'll say at the outset that whenever you're dealing with a piece of music that admits of a range of interpretation, that ambiguity alone is a point in its favor. The composition begins with an overture, so identified in the score. This introductory section is like a table of contents, but presented in reverse order. Much later in the composition, a summary coda will counterpoint this section by a revisiting of the work's movements, now in the order of their presentation. The first of those movements is a gigantic double fugue in the Baroque style, with 3 variations. The second, a calm and sweet pastoral landscape. A striking formal innovation in this composition is the positioning of movements 3 and 4 relative to each other. My understanding of the work is that movement 3, the scherzo of the piece and its center of gravity, is actually embedded within movement 4. My case centers on a dramatic understanding of the piece. Movement 4 is a celebratory dance representing the triumph of reconciliation over conflict or something of that sort. It follows logically from movement 2, so it would seem that a designator of movement 3 should be in order. But that celebratory dance is interrupted, and the music is diverted into channels that ultimately yield the work's most wrenching crisis, which is resolved gloriously in a denouement that brings the 3 main subjects of the piece together in profound reconciliation. And then the celebratory dance begins anew and is permitted to run its course. If the foregoing sounded confusing to you, I hope it will all come clear as you listen to the piece and encounter my annotations. I probably should say a few words about double fugues, since one of my viewers, Jack Hausman, asked about them a few days ago. In my understanding, a double fugue is a fugue with two subjects of equal importance sounded simultaneously and treated as a unit according to the logic of the fugue. In this case, both of the subjects are presented together at the tonic level, followed by answers that alternate between the dominant and the tonic. This happens numerous times during the Große Fuge, and sometimes the exposition I've just described is not complete. The subjects can be treated in all kinds of ways, and you'll soon see what an inventor Beethoven was if you'll follow his lines carefully and trace what you're hearing and seeing back to the original presentation of the material. In fact, there's hardly a note in this composition that cannot be accounted for in that way. I will refer to these two fugue subjects as subjects A and B. Subject A is a long line that includes strange chromatic notes and the leap of a diminished seventh. At its first authentic presentation in the viola, its notes are detached and syncopated. Subject B is a jagged, belligerent-sounding affair in Baroque-style dotted rhythms whose athletic, melodic leaps often exceed an octave. My ordering of those two subjects may seem counterintuitive, since it is always the latter that leads the former. But I chose that ordering because the subject I've identified as A is present throughout the composition, while subject B disappears for a long while and then returns. The underlying narrative of the Great Fugue seems to me to be the story of those two subjects and their rocky relationship. Both of them are frankly ugly tunes, completely unsingable and seemingly at war with each other in movement 1. In fact, for me, the word that captures most successfully the character of that movement is violent. You will actually encounter 4 double fugues within the course of that movement, a primary fugue and its 3 variations, a plan that reflects in macrocosm the 4-voice exposition of the fugue itself. Each of those fugues follows a standard plan, an exposition followed by a development that includes such devices as middle entries and stretti. The first and second variations include countersubjects, and the third variation is in rhythmic diminution, so the answers come twice as fast as earlier. Occasionally, the harmony threatens to run off the rails, and by the end of this movement, the music is in full-blown crisis territory. The outcome is a collapse into the flat submediant, G-flat major, for movement 2. This is a more pastoral-sounding movement, which presses subject A into service as accompaniment for its sweet, serene main theme, thereby transforming that subject into something unexpectedly beautiful. Just a hint of fugal treatment remains in this movement. Each presentation of the subject is answered a fifth higher. The joyful celebratory dance that follows, based on a rhythmic diminution of subject A, seems a logical next step, and the arrival of the first unambiguously B-flat major music seems to signal the approaching end of the composition. But that would certainly result in a formally unbalanced work, and would leave a critical aspect of the great double fugue that comprised movement 1 unaddressed. That is, those two fugue subjects were obviously in an antagonistic posture vis-a-vis each other, and their differences had not been settled when subject B simply dropped out of sight at the beginning of movement 2. Subject A has enjoyed its transformation, its redemption perhaps, but what about the other? This matter will clearly have to be settled. That is what makes it necessary for a third movement to intrude into this light-hearted celebratory dance. And it is, in fact, from that point, the return of rigorous counterpoint as movement 3, that this amazing composition scales the heights and wins the crown. That was kind of purple, wasn't it? Two of this work's most novel features, its overture and summary coda, should be understood together. I mentioned this earlier. They are essentially mirrors of each other. In the overture, the work's various movements were forecast, because that is what operatic overtures do. In the summary part of what is actually an immense multi-part coda, the movements are recalled, similar to a treatment found near the beginning of the final movement of the same composer's Ninth Symphony, written a year earlier, but serving a completely different purpose. Enjoy the ride. The Emerson Quartet treats us to a wonderful reading of one of Beethoven's greatest and most daunting compositions, the Great Fugue in B-flat major. This recording is available on the Deutsche Grammophon label.